welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we are coming at you with two brand new reviews for two brand new records. We are going to be talking about the new album, three-way collaborative album, in fact, between rapper Mike, Earl Sweatshirt, and Surf Gang. We're going to be talking about the new double album collaboration, Pompeii slash Utility. And we're also going to be talking about the most recent album to drop from legendary neo soul singer Jill Scott, her new album, To Whom This May Concern. But let's start off with Mike and Earl, which, when I say out loud, sounds weirdly unceremonious. Like Mike and Earl, like fucking Mike and Earl and the Dying Girl.
Mike and Earl need wedding dates.
We have talked about Earl Sweatshirt on this channel multiple times. We had an old record club where we talked about his kind of like seminal sort of artistic feat in the form of the incredible Some Rap Songs, one of my favorite albums ever, really, one of my favorite hip hop albums of all time. And we've also covered his releases since then that have come out, like Sick and Voir Dire, and an album highlight of last year that Jen and I talked about was actually Earl's album Live, Laugh, Love, where he kind of came back, not to say that he had ever fallen off or had done something that people didn't like get along with super hard. But Live, Laugh, Love really felt like a kind of critical return to form, just because he hadn't really captured the zeitgeist with those intermittent releases between sort of bigger projects with stuff like the Feet of Clay EP, for instance. So it was nice to see him come back, and it was nice to see him on that record show some due maturation in his writing and in his production. Like, it was a really solid advancement of his sound, and I was very happy to see that he was not done evolving, because for as big of a fan as I am of Earl Sweatshirt, I have been a little bit worried in the past of him potentially kind of painting himself into a creative corner, which is why this album being on the horizon was so interesting, because he is pairing himself with Surf Gang, who are not who I would describe as typically within Earl's like production wheelhouse, like from any era that he's dealt with. I mean, collaborating with Mike is very much something that feels spiritually correct, because the dude has kind of carved his own path in the drumless hip hop scene that Earl kind of really made his own in the late 2010s.
Mike and
And
Earl
he's
Sweatshirt have also been friends for years up until this point, so it makes sense that something like this would eventually come along.
really only a matter of time now that you mention it. And it's like, yeah, I mean, like I could see that, but even in like propositioning such a thing, you kind of wonder, what's the alchemy of this project going to be? Because these two artists are known for being very similar. Like Mike, when he first came onto the scene, was kind of, talked about unflatteringly even by some people because of his similarity to Earl. So on here, we get a double record divided in half, of mostly the first half being Mike and Surf Gang's collaboration, the second half being Earl and Surf Gang's collaboration, though notably they do appear on each other's halves. But I was just so kind of immediately kind of intimidated by this, because obviously double album sort of invites extra scrutiny. Like, what's this going to be? Is there a conceptual reason for dividing this in half? Splitting it between two artists is interesting. We've got this sort of speaker box, the love below approach here to the structure going on. And it's like, all right, what's going on? And with Surf Gang, we see an interesting turn from them, as they kind of cater to each of these artists differently. They explore these more internet cloud rap plug style beats with Earl, but something a little bit more like traditional, yet still quite experimental and electronic with Mike's stuff. And conversely, Mike sounds a little bit more animated, I guess, than I've heard him on some of his past projects. And the production kind of matches that energy. Whereas I would say that Earl maybe even takes a concerted effort to sound even more kind of out of it than he usually does. But that doesn't come at the cost of Earl's typically excellent pen. I have some rather weird and wiry thoughts about this album, but as a fellow fan of Earl's, and I'm guessing you've probably been into a little bit of Mike's stuff, I've gotten into some of his stuff more recently as he's been on the up and up. But how did this play to you? Just because it is such a it feels like it's on such an island for music releases this year, but it also feels like it was released with a like not enough fanfare for what this potentially could be. So I was a little perplexed by it at first, honestly.
Well, I wasn't quite sure what this was going to be because we got a new Earl Sweatshirt record last year with Live Laugh Love, but we also got a new Mike record last year, Showbiz, which I also thought was very good and showed more of an upbeat approach to Mike's delivery and his performances. And it has a very kind of erratic flow to it, where
Hmm.
songs often flow directly into each other in a way that makes listening to the album feel almost like listening to a live performance, where the beats are just changing so quickly that the music is never really stopping. And so Showbiz is a really interesting project. But when I heard that this was coming out, I for some reason assumed that this would be way more like a scare in the hose situation where they would be going back and forth
Trading
on,
bars.
yeah, where they would be trading bars, basically. And so when I went in and realized that this was going to be divided into two parts, I kind of started to take that at face value. And I
Hmm.
thought, okay, how much do I like Pompeii? How much do I like Utility? How well does the presentation of these two things as in continuity with each other help both of them? And here's my takeaway from that. Pompeii is very appropriately titled
Yeah.
because this is the most energetic that I've ever heard Mike be, and the Surf Gang production matches this plug and the abstract hip hop beats with the kind of drumless approach to percussion and a lot of drum and bass on this record.
Mm.
But something else that Mike has done that I've never heard him do before on this is that he's bringing in a lot of Dirty South influence on some of these songs.
Yeah.
There's a song on here, "Da Bid," where he's rapping a little bit ahead of the beat in a very
Hmm.
MF Doom style way,
Yeah.
but it's also a Dirty South beat that sounds like it came right off of the 21 Savage Metro Boomin mixtape from a few years ago.
Yeah.
It sounds
Yeah.
exactly like a cutoff of Savage Mode 2.
Hmm.
And I really like that hybridization of Earl's very laid back, kind of slurred delivery of his lines, but with a very frenetic pace to the actual syllables and the bars. He's speaking slowly, but doing it quickly in a weird sort of way, where all
Yes.
the syllables are just drawn out just a little bit, and he's always a little bit ahead of the beat in a way that gives it a bit more of a lively feel than maybe you're used to if you go back to, say, Weight of the World era Mike, which is the first album of his I listened to, which is actually my introduction to Earl, was his feature on the last track of that record. And
Oh,
that's what got me really into Earl's music around the time that,
full
yeah,
circle.
around the time that Live, Laugh, Love was coming out. And so Pompeii, I think is a really good record. I appreciate the reserved but solid approach
Yeah.
on a lot of these songs, like on Minty, where the bass hits are really, really loud, but Mike's whole flow is just very, very quiet. And it sounds like he's having more of a fun time consciously flexing than he's actually flexing, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Hmm.
He's enjoying feeling like he's posing in the mirror, but not so much trying to impress or really stretch himself to make himself this kind of larger than life presence, which ironically gives this album a much more comfortable approach, even when he's saying these completely grandiose claims to fame, like, in style, like they made me the Pope. I just smile and wave to the hose. And
So good.
there are occasionally moments where the beats even feel like they're pushing Mike forward more than he's getting ahead of them, like the
Yeah,
song
I'd agree.
Fear, where the beat is a little bit ahead of him and it feels like he's trying to keep up with it. In a stark contrast to something like the Danny Brown Stardust album, where it feels like Danny is pushing the entire soundscape forward.
Yeah.
There are moments where Mike and Surf Gang kind of go back and forth on who's leading the dance of what this album is going to end up sounding like, where sometimes Mike is really ahead of things, and sometimes the beats are more so pushing Mike's sense of tempo and Mike's sense of dynamism. But we get to the end of Pompeii, and we get to Kirkland, which is the
Mm,
track that Mike and Earl are finally trading blows on. And man, I love this song. I love how, again, laid back and reserved, they present so much of this collaboration. Earl has a line on this where he's like, and then in a few more bars, I'm going to switch out the beat and you're going to be really impressed, aren't you? And then, like he
so good.
advertises a beat switch and then he does it on a song that's all about how he doesn't really care as much about the game, but he's kind of resigned to the point. Like the repeated sentiment is the idea of I got no dog in the fight. I got no horse in the race. Like he intentionally kind of backed out of the competitive sport
Mm,
aspect of hip hop. And I think Live, Laugh, Love was more of a examination of coming to that realization.
yes.
And this song serves as the reflection on that process. And you know what? Doing an album like this, once you feel like you've really left the competitive side of your rap scene, makes a lot of sense because
Yeah.
this is the album that you make so you can have fun while you're making it. It doesn't
Yes.
feel like it's really trying to, again, it doesn't feel like it's trying too hard to actually flex on anybody,
Mhm.
to impress anybody, to insist that the game needs to be changed and this is what we should be doing instead. It feels more like these guys are just having fun, and utility reflects that sentiment as well. And hearing Earl on some Dirty South stuff on the first proper track on his album, again with the frowny face and the smiley face, is just so funny. But when he's talking about how, I found the strength to get up again and I'm in the bank and I'm the only one laughing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Such a great bar. And one of my favorite songs, or one of my favorite lines on this song that I really think reflects the state of where this album is at, I usually pay to watch fellas act, is a great bar about feeling disconnected from the competitive nature of the game,
Mm.
which I think is just a really, really, really great approach to how this album is going to go. But man, Earl, I really hope a summer of bullshit is not on the way because I heard that line and I was just immediately like, please,
Yeah.
please do not let this be. I really hope Earl doesn't know something about whatever is going to come out this summer that is inspiring this line. I really, really hope some ugly shit is not on the horizon as far as the rap game goes. Because, I mean, you got to think. Danny Brown was on that album doing a hypothetical big three where it was him and Earl and Kendrick. Guys that he's worked with before. We got to remember that Earl Sweatshirt has met Kendrick Lamar in
Yep.
person possibly at least once and is on a record with him. So there's a non-zero chance that he knows something that's going to be coming down the pipe. So when I hear a summer of bullshit is on the way, I get a little bit scared in a little bit positive way, but probably more
Yeah.
negative way,
Yeah.
considering where we're at after the fall off, after the fallout of this
The
whole.
fallout and then the fall off. Yeah,
Yeah, because
exactly.
I mean, the release of the Fall Off is an extension of this whole narrative arc that hip
Yep.
hop has been on. And so after the Fall Off, it really does feel like this whole thing, now that J. Cole's definitive statement on it is over, it really feels like this whole story arc, I don't know how else to describe it, has concluded. And I
Hmm.
really hope that Earl is not teasing that we're going to have to start digging all this back up again. But anyway, back to this, because really I think this whole album is a testament to that we can finally get away from this stuff.
Yes.
People that are disconnected don't have to weigh in on it anymore because it really did feel like there was a moment where everybody had to weigh in on this. And I mean, that's even a sentiment that J. Cole got at that frustrated him. And it frustrated me too, to some extent, with some people that decided to wade into it. But anyway, the implication that Earl, still has vendettas to see through on the song Lead Belly, which is the other
Yeah.
collaboration with Mike on this, which is the one where they're the most like explicitly flexing about their strength in the game, I would argue. This kind of reserved dominance that Mike and Earl are both getting at is a really interesting sentiment. And it's a really unique feeling to express as an artist. And it's the only kind of approach by which you could arrive at an album like this.
Yeah.
Because I think that overall, the construction of the album, it isn't quite the sum of its parts,
I
where
would agree.
I think the idea of this album gives the album itself a lot more mileage than what it's actually composed of. Because my biggest complaint with this is that I think it's just a little bit too long and that a lot of it kind of starts to bleed together, which is
Mhm.
just such a nebulous way to approach a discussion about a record. But I really don't know what else to say about some of these songs when so many songs on this are just a minute and 20 seconds or a minute and 30 seconds and there's a beat switch and then another song starts. And I'm just like, if you could condense some of this, I think you would have a much more definitive statement on the potential of a collaboration like this, where you can have the one production house kind of be pulling the strings of what the collaboration between the two rappers is even going to sound like. Because
More
you,
of a
when you
Mad
have
Lib approach.
yeah, more of the Mad Lib approach because when you have this kind of middleman between Mike and Earl that Surf Gang is serving to be in this, you can arrive at a really interesting impasse between producer and artist, especially when Mike and Earl spend so little time on the mic at the same time.
Hmm.
It really could feel more like a Surf Gang album. And I don't really know a whole lot about what these guys do, so I assume that's clouding some of my judgment. But looking at their catalog, that does appear to be their approach up until this point,
Hmm.
where the individual members of Surf Gang really go back and forth in their different individual sensibilities because it is several members, and they'll have one person that they'll kind of bring in to give each individual project kind of unique look and texture and feel. And if in this case that's Mike and Earl Sweatshirt, that's a really interesting idea for a project that for me comes together. I mean, it is what it says it is. And in a lot of stretches, it's a very fun record to listen to. But I wish it didn't feel so much like diminishing returns in the middle chunks of each of these albums. I think both of them start strong and end strong, but there are moments where they really start to bleed together in the middle that I find a little bit disappointing. But overall, I do enjoy this project, and I do think it's an interesting turn for both Mike and Earl. And I think Surf Gang's contributions to it, if anything, give us a test run of what these two could sound like under some really different influences driving their beats forward. Because I would love to hear Mike and Earl do more of this kind of dirty South plus plug stuff
Please.
on a more cohesive album from a songwriting perspective.
I really can't disagree with much of any of that, honestly. And man, my thoughts on this are so wiry. Like, as somebody who's a fan of all involved, less than the sum of its parts is not only like the best byline for criticism with it, it's kind of an inevitability with the pedigree involved of just like, yeah, I mean, I guess it just sort of makes sense that that's not going to live up to its full potential. So I kind of knew that going in and just was like not preparing myself for disappointment necessarily, but I was like, I have a feeling that this is gonna be, shall we say, light work. Not necessarily that it'll be bad or even low effort, but it's not gonna be a major statement. And I don't think it is. But the more I listened to this, the more I got a good grasp as to where this album's intent was aimed. And the more I just kind of became more and more not disappointed, but just kind of sad that it doesn't quite live up to that potential that I tried to eschew my expectations with. Because the ingredients are all here. Firstly, trying to put together this, like, because I do have different thoughts on each album. On Pompeii, it's really like straightforward. What you hear is what you get. And I think that that kind of is both the greatest strength and greatest weakness. It's a lot of stuff that I don't feel like in a vacuum is super unique, but Mike's pen is good, his delivery is unique, and like you said, he is kind of switching it up and occasionally rapping ahead of the beat rather than behind it for a change, which I actually do find quite refreshing when it comes to this stuff. Again, I'm an MF Doom fan, so I guess that this is just comes with the territory at this point. But I love how lively and dynamic the production is specifically. It's nothing that's going to blow anybody away, but I do think it's solid. And then you throw the Earl half into this project, and then things get real twisty. Because on the one hand, I think this is my preferred half. On the other, I don't much care for the way it sounds. Like, I like a lot of the first couple of beats. And then they just cut like the digital hi-hats, man, they're all over this half. And it's like
Yeah,
the main idea that the beats contain. And it's like, this is fine. It's functional. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But with what Earl's going for here, it's not synergizing in the way that I think it could. Because Earl sounds great over some of these beats. Great. It's just that the project bogs itself down in them too much. And it makes songs like Chicago or Book of Eli, which aren't necessarily inherently weaker tracks, feel like weaker tracks merely because a bunch of similar songs come before them. So it's difficult to kind of like structurally, this is already in a weird place. Thankfully, it's only just north of an hour. So, like, yeah, I agree it's too long, but it's also not like exhausting.
yeah. And
But
like it's a double album, you know what you're gonna get. You're gonna get a little bit of length on this.
yeah, you gotta go in expecting a degree of that to some extent. But once you take a look at what Earl is actually saying on here, I think this project becomes a hell of a lot more interesting. Because Earl, he is a very insular artist. I do not doubt that this man has an endless love for the art of hip hop, like at all. But the name of the game has been externalizing the internal. It hasn't been a lot of macro stuff. It was a little bit on albums like Sick, like we see him talking about grander, bigger, broader problems. And that's not to say that he never spoke on those before, but it was very, very much within his perspective. And he's been kind of reaching further and further outward with the albums that he's released this decade. And I feel like for the first time, we're finally seeing Earl Sweatshirt attempt at contextualizing himself within hip hop, which is very, very different than just, rapping for rapping's sake. And so I found a lot of these interesting in that I feel like Earl's sort of affected delivery on here, sort of reeling himself back a little bit from the more animated stuff he was doing on Live, Laugh, Love, is kind of his attempt to put his disillusionment forward. Because, he's talking about, getting that bag, being the only one smiling in the bank. He is surrounded by people that he does not necessarily relate to. And he doesn't admonish them or diminish people for that. I mean, he's very much the attitude that he puts forward is very much the, y'all get your bag kind of thing, but he does not seem to identify with specifically the competitive and commercial spaces that hip hop is being moved by. And I feel like it's important we get people like him to say stuff like that because all of the credible rappers are very much being like, woohoo Team Kendrick, which like, that's good. I think that that's probably the right choice. But we need to have some clearer heads prevail and remind people where everything lies relative to everything else. That, Kendrick Lamar and the forces of hip hop are not the unequivocal good that they are often made out to be sometimes. And I feel like it's more than understandable to find yourself at a distance with that, especially if you're an artist like Earl. I mean, like, he's basically the second most successful Odd Future cohort. And think about how different he is from his other compatriot and other most successful member of Odd Future, Tyler. Those guys are creative opposites in every way, shape, and form. So he's got to be feeling weird about this kind of stuff. And I feel like the attempt of putting these two albums together is kind of to showcase this dichotomy of a before and an after. Mike is where Earl was years ago, and this is sort of him showcasing the default state of where he is, and then Earl gets the second half to kind of pull back, to add a little perspective. And he does. But the lack of like actual bar trading on here ends up being this thing's Achilles heel to me because whenever it does happen, it's an album highlight. It's awesome. I want these people to work together. Like Earl Sweatshirt being a good feature on a song is practically mimetic now. I mean, ever since Really Doe, you would have to be insane not to look forward to an Earl Sweatshirt feature. It's just the truth. And I want them to be able to capitalize on that potential more. I feel like being able to go back and forth and actually be in a dialogue with one another would enhance this album's thesis tenfold rather than just being something you can kind of see from a conceptual framework angle. It doesn't really seem to engage with that aspect. It just relies on the polarity of placing these two things together, which is interesting. It makes me more willing to dive into what this album is attempting to do, but it also makes me way more aware of its potential limitations. And so I end up being like, ah, yeah, a lot of admirable stuff here, a lot of stuff going on, but there are just things that hold it back from being the best version of itself. And I'm not even fully interested in how these two artists are, are they going to like fully explore this concept to the extent that I want them to? Because frankly, it doesn't quite sound like they want to, and that's not like a problem. It's just that I need to know what the deal is going into projects like this. So it is very weird. It is very messy. I hope that perhaps like the solid foundation of this and the general success of it could potentially pave the way for a more dynamic collaboration in the future. Because again, I want Earl to collaborate because I think that the more he evolves, the better he can suit himself to other people. And it's always something to look forward to when he works with somebody else. So I want this to aim them in the right direction because I like what it is in theory, but in practice, it's just not something I could say I see myself returning to an awful lot, particularly because of your point about some of the song structures, where it does feel like they kind of lose steam so fast, you just kind of forget that the songs even switch at some points, which is never an issue I had with an album like some rap songs, a 20-minute long album where every single song is a minute and a half long, but you don't really care because it's more about the overall structure of the record rather than the piece by piece construction of it all. So it does feel like maybe a creative backstep for Earl, but I also don't want to overestimate how creatively invested these two are in this project to begin with, because it does come across as a more casual
I
affair, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing is that this to me is pretty obviously the product of a guy who on Tour de France has a refrain, should I leave it? Should I take it? And very clearly chose to leave it.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I respect that. And in some respects, I even like, I kind of applaud that, I guess. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean like there's just a kind of lack of a specific clear-headed goal on here. And again, it's like if you had, if we focused the pen, perhaps, if we got a little bit more conceptual with it, I think that this has potential to be taken further. As it stands, it's a good curio for each artist. Like if you're a fan of Earl or a fan of Mike, I think you'll get something out of this. This doesn't exactly keep complete pace with each of their releases like on their own. Like you do get to hear a new facet of Earl on this album, which again, love having that. Not always successful, but I still love having it in general. Please though, more Dirty South beats. This needs to happen. I'm not saying that Earl should fucking do a collab album with Big Crit, even though I am saying that I would pre-order that shit day one, because I would, but it's nice. It's just it had the potential to be a lot more, but I also don't want to hold the album accountable for something that it never really desired to be. So,
So yeah, I think it's a good way to put it that it's a serviceable curio. If you're a fan of Mike, if you're a fan of Earl Sweatshirt, there are things here that you can't get on any other record, but the overall project of Pompeii and Utility doesn't quite come together into what it might have been
yeah.
if it had had a little bit more focus put on it, and if maybe the stakes felt a little bit higher with regard to it, maybe that focus would be there.
Mhm.
But this ultimately does feel like a low stakes release at the end of the day. It's a good one, but it is low stakes.
Yes, absolutely. And there's no problem with that inherently. So, if it sounds interesting to you, if you're a fan, you'll probably dig it. So, check it out. It's
Yeah.
thumbs up from me, even though I have messy ass thoughts. But yeah, good stuff.
Yeah,
Man,
absolutely agree.
if you had told me at the beginning of this year that I would have very slightly preferred the J. Cole double album to the Earl Sweatshirt and Mike double album, I probably would have smacked you. Like, I would be like, what do you take me for? Who do you fucking think I am? But like, I do kind of feel that way, like a little bit, a tiny bit. But on the note of bigger figures in the sort of hip hop world, let's transition to talking about this latest album here from one Miss Jill Scott. And you know what, Jen? It is so funny that yesterday you texted me about trying to find a particular needle drop of a hip hop song in Mr. Robot.
Yes, I
And
did.
it's so funny because the entire reason I know who Jill Scott is because of Mr. Robot. Because in season two, we have that needle drop of that Lupe Fiasco song from Food and Liquor, the debut of his. And on
Yeah.
that is a Jill Scott feature that it's either a feature or a sample. I'm not sure how it's exactly credited, but I remember her vocal hook on there and I was like, I love that hook. It's fantastic. I actually had a project that I made in college where I had to like conceptualize a TV miniseries for film school, and I made the intro to it, and that was the song that I used. So I was actually like, okay, Jill Scott, I know who this is. And the entire reason I elected to cover this is shout out to creator on this platform that everybody should go and pay more attention to. YouTuber video essayist Lil Bill said that this presently was album of the year. And I take that dude's recommendations quite seriously because he doesn't really ever tend to lead me astray. So I was like, okay, this is a little bit older, but I do really want to check this out because I guess little known fact about me that I've never really had the opportunity to talk about or divulge just because this is such a not in vogue or hip thing at all is that I am a diehard, longtime appreciator of vocal jazz. My grandmother and mom adored the music of people like Nat King Cole, and so a lot of that stuff just was the stuff that I grew up with. And as I've gotten older, I am frankly a lot more into the music of people like Aretha Franklin and fucking Nina Simone than most people tend to be. And I love that kind of album where it's very kind of not necessarily back to basics, but it's muscular, it's foundational. You're kind of building everything on the shoulders of your central performer. And because this album seemed to be getting so much traction, I actually wanted to do a little bit of my homework on here. And I went and explored Jill Scott's early music, particularly her 2000 debut, Who is Jill Scott? Which Jill Scott is a figure in music that's interesting to talk about from my perspective because to put it bluntly, there's a subsection of artists that are just really like that white people are just completely blind to because the cultural pockets they exist in and grew up with are so relegated to the community that it just kind of takes a while. Like it's like Anita Baker. Like if you ask a random Joe Schmo on the street who Anita Baker is, they probably won't be able to tell you. You ask somebody in a particular neighborhood who Anita Baker is, they can probably name you 6 songs off the top of their fucking head. And I mean, like the only reason I know who Anita Baker is because of a Kendrick Lamar album. So that goes to show you that our perspective here is quite limited. But I wanted to familiarize myself here, and I took a listen, and I love her debut. It is so neo soul, Soulquarian, D'Angelo type of stuff, but it's
Ooh.
written with this very academic kind of like, Toni Morrison, if she was really feeling herself, is how I would describe the early songs of Jill Scott. Like there's a very academic but a very sly and still very sexual attitude that she has that I find just like really captivating. And with this warm production, and I was like, okay, I feel like I've got a little bit better of a grasp on this lady, and now I can engage with this because this album, you look at the album cover, and it's just like this feels like it emanates an important energy, and I want to engage with it as such. And then I hit the first proper track on here, Be Great. And damn, what a start to this album.
It feels
Woo!
it feels great to hear a record that comes out the gate swinging, not only being good, but insisting that it will be good.
A promise, yes.
And then it actually is that good.
Oh God, yeah. I
Because
mean,
I'm not going to spoil it. I love this. I'm in love with this record. This is
it's
fantastic.
incredible. It's
And
it's incredible.
it's so energetic and filled with this radical positivity and just completely unmoored confidence that Jill Scott is capable of this. And
Oh
damn
yeah.
it if she isn't, because every single move on this. She has such a versatility on this, which I think was the thing that I didn't expect. That was what most
Yes.
surprised me
Yes.
going in, is I was like, well, Jill Scott's been around a bit, so this is probably going to be, more
No frills.
traditional, no frills, but fun, very well accomplished, very well put together vocal jazz. No, there are leaps and bounds in dynamics and scene tributes and approaches on this album that continually surprised me the whole way through. You've got Trombone Shorty on Be Great, who's like a very underrated producer, but who's been on a lot of great records in a lot of weird genres. Like, this dude has worked with everybody from, well, Jill Scott to like Dierks Bentley and
Yeah.
Nashville guys who like
Hmm.
working with him. And he like did the some of the music for the Peanuts movie from like 10 years ago. Like
Wow.
this dude is
What a
everywhere.
pull.
Yeah, he's kind of everywhere, and he sounds great on this. The trombone playing on this is incredible, and I just love the sentiment of be great. This consistent reaffirming that you get what you put into something. And if you can put a lot into it, then you should, because
Hmm.
then it gives it back to you. It's all
Investment.
about the positive feedback loop of giving a fuck. Like, I don't know any other way to put it. It's about how it feels good to care about things, and it feels good to care about what you do. That's what Be Great is about. That's what Beautiful People is about. And
Hmm.
I love that sentiment, and I love how joyfully that Jill Scott can bring that forward. But she's not just bringing, I saw somebody on Rate Your Music compare this to like Lizzo in terms of like a sickeningly sweet positivity. And I'm not
Nah.
willing to go that far because
Nah.
what Jill Scott does then to switch up the flow is that you get Northside with Tierra Whack on
Fuck.
this, which
Yes.
by leaning on Tierra Whack's more Afro beat laden strengths turns this album in a completely different direction that I just really, really loved. And I've got so many like vocal snippets of this album floating around from my head, like a off at the back of the ancestors has been.
It's such a
I
good
know I shouldn't
hook.
say it, but that's been bouncing around in my head while listening to this record. But then you get to, again, but even when we get to the extremely traditional stuff like Pay You on Tuesday, she knows how to make that so fun and so appropriately timed because you get the hilarious disclaimer that's like, I'm not responsible for anything that happens
Yeah, that was so
during
good.
the part that I'm singing this song, okay? Random disclaimer. Don't do any of the shit I say in this song. Uh,
Honestly, I wouldn't have been shocked if Tyler showed up on this album. Because when I looked at it,
yeah,
I was like, I expected the same thing. I expected something that was very fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. And I'm like, if she excels at that, that's really all that matters. And then you take a look at some of the features on here: Tierra Whack, Ab Soul, Jid. You're like, okay, now hold on. Jill Scott is tapped the fuck in to modern hip hop. You can tell that she listens and that she appreciates it because that's a distinct selection of rappers that she has selected to come on here. And they all do great. This is the best Absol feature I've heard in a good fucking while, and I miss this
man.
motherfucker. I need him back ASAP. ASAP. But there's also the JID feature on To Be Honest, which is just fuck, fuck. Like
A
the
second amazingly constructed, elegantly produced, crisp instrumental
mm,
over a song that is affectionately about a cougar relationship.
yes,
Because we
yes.
got so we got the Tyler Childers song from last year, and now Jid is putting his spin on it.
MILF
Uh,
anthem. And look, listen, you Jill Scott's voice is fucking sexy. Like there is no other way to put it. It has always sounded that way, but like I love that you can hear this woman smiling while she sings. There
yeah,
is
you can hear
such
her feeling herself.
it's such infectious joy. You can't help but feel like, yeah, the warmth, the positivity. And I don't think it's facile at all. Because, like, as somebody who has enjoyed a lot of Lizzo's music in the past, her being a bit extra and leaning into the whole, like, pop feminism and pop positivity and everything, it's appreciated, but it's not exactly, like, nuanced or it's coming from a real place. I don't doubt that at all. But I never really interpreted that as something you should sort of engage with beyond face value. Whereas here, I think that's quite the opposite because, again, it's the radical positive angle and embracing a radical positivity that changes you because that's kind of what the album ends up being about. Like, the front half of this really is kind of the more thoughtful, polemic half, where we're getting things like Off the Back, for example, which has that fantastic hook that you mentioned that is very much her paying tribute to the people that came before her. I love the way that she even puts it as the people who came before us, they were fighting for their freedom and they were fighting for our freedom by proxy, but they were fighting for themselves, kind of implicitly sort of putting the onus on us to be like, yes, it's important to fight for future generations. Yes, it's important to fight for the right thing, but it is also important to fucking fight for yourself. Respect yourself enough to know that you are worth fighting for it. And that's such a beautiful, essential thing I feel like people need to hear and be reminded of these days. And, you've also got, again, North Side, which is fantastic, and, songs like Pressure, which, I mean, again, phenomenal fucking hook, but it also really engages with the idea of the Black artistic experience and how everyone is encouraged into a kind of homogeneity, a specifically very white homogeneity that they have to sort of play into in order to experience any kind of success and thus compromise themselves. And so she kind of gets to pull away from that and be like, respect yourself enough not only to know that you're worth fighting for, but respect yourself enough not to compromise yourself, to know that you don't need to play into these things in order to be successful, that there are people who care enough to listen to you. That's what this album is essentially proving. And I mean, again, and even on songs like The Math, for instance, we're really getting into the kind of the nitty gritty of these sort of polemics, and I really, really appreciate that. That being said, I love the front half of this album, but I'll break a bit from what I would usually say and say that the back half of this album, that is way more about baby making jams, is kind of my preferred half. Because damn, some of these jams are tasty as fuck. Because
So I remember when we talked about Chromacopia. I want to draw a line here. I
I see
said
where you're
something about
going.
Chromacopia because we were talking about the like negative reception to some of the more sexually explicit
Sticky, those songs.
material on that record, and I said something, and I'll repeat it, which was that personal freedom is not complete without sexual freedom.
I thought about you saying this like an hour ago. I don't know why I felt the need to say that, but like listening to this again, that quote did pop up in my head because it's like that's the goal. That is part of this. It's more of a part of this than it was on Chromacopia even.
Yeah, I mean, this album puts even more of an emphasis about being sexually fulfilled because in the middle of the album, you get kind of a marking and remembrance of the low points that have brought Jill to this. You've got
Mhm.
Biggest Pimp of the Year, which is a very like sharp, incredibly well done social critique that actually uses this very dialectic framework of like, this is how pimps work, this is how prostitutes work. This is a capitalist relationship. Here's where that appears in the fundamental systems that govern our world, like
It's all
pharmaceutical
of them.
companies and organized religion. Pimps.
All of them.
It's the same stuff, and that's what's keeping us from reaching our full potential. And it's like I fully see how that framework makes sense and works. Like I'm not just taking the concept for granted because it's a funny idea for a song. Like
No,
no, I actually think this is a interesting way to look at the world of
no.
like the idea of pimping and being pimped, being sexually, physically exploited for capital, where it appears outside of the most direct, straightforward definition of that, which is like, yeah, being sexually exploited, your body being commodified. That appears in other places in our fundamental systems just through more abstracted layers of interaction. The song does work to fully explore the nuances of that claim and of that comparison. It's a very high intellect song, and two shorts feature even where he speaks of this kind
Yes.
of personification of the pimp that runs every system in every world. Even that gets to a point where, like, yeah, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but you understand why it's there, and it has a literary aspect to it where this character says something about what Jill is getting at in her more direct verses on the song. And then you've got Me For, which takes this great Birdman flip to make it all about how
Yeah.
much she regrets the relationship that she got entangled in that led her to become the fourth baby mama. And
Yep.
then the math and a universe and lifting me up kind of get us out of this valley and into the bright place that brought her to this record. But there's one more thing that Jill Scott still needs to do before we can go home for the night, which is get in bed. And so don't
Listen.
play and don't be honest and right here, right now, back to back to back. I said this about the Sturgill Simpson album too, where these sex jams, if they didn't sound so different from each other and if they didn't have such verbosity, would threaten to bleed into each other. But all of them take very different approaches to the appeals of sex because you've got
Mm.
the physical sensation and the connection, and then just the general satisfaction that all those songs explore about being in a well executed sexual relationship. I think it's great. Like, I legitimately think more artists can explore this and make great art doing it. So I love that we've been able to talk about that in this segment.
And the best part of it, other than Jill Scott herself, who is as magnetic of a performer as she has ever been, getting the producer behind Frank Ocean's Blonde and basically everything else he's made, getting the producer behind American Boyfriend by Kevin Abstract, Isolation by Kali Uchis, fucking like this
Mm.
was an expert production and mixing choice on behalf of all involved, particularly the choice of Omas Keith, who is the guy that I just mentioned, who is basically the voice of modern neo soul. And it sounds like this album has that pedigree. Like when this album goes for something bigger and more raucous and more rhythmic, oh, the drums are so crisp. They're so big. The rhythm section on this entire album is delicious. Even when it's not at the forefront of the song, there's so much love for hip hop here that like there we do have songs where Jill's actually rapping on here. She's got legit flows and they're good. Like
Yeah, like
she's
Ode to
doing
Nikki,
it.
Pressure, Northside, all like straight up hip hop songs that
This
she
is
executes perfectly.
this is the type of album that, you know, God willing, if Lauryn Hill ever made another album again, this is the kind of thing you would want from someone like Lauryn Hill. It's got that pedigree, it's got that experience, it's got the collaboration, it's got the wit, the humor, the writing, and it's like it really is just a complete package of a record. And you get like a really dynamic look at someone who you maybe necessarily like took for granted in the space of modern music. Like the opener specifically, Be Great, reminded me of Introvert on Sometimes I Might Be Introvert. Just the grand entrance, the big, like, this is me, this is who I am, this is my thesis statement, let's run with it. And like the features on here are so decisively employed. Like that Absol feature on Ode to Nikki, for instance, like it made me feel a little good because whenever I catch an inside reference in a hip hop song, I feel a little like hit of euphoria of just being like, ah, I understood that reference. I do the Leo Point thing because Absol on this song makes direct reference to the Mos Def song and Mos Def album Black on Both Sides, but particularly the song Mathematics, and which is like one of the best hip hop songs of all time. And that is a song that breaks down social issues in the exact same way this album does. But on that record, again, it's more of a very esteemed, very erudite sort of academic hip hop record. And this is an album that, for the vast majority of it, feels like a party. This is a fun album. And I didn't necessarily expect that going in. Not that to say that Jill couldn't be fun, but at her age, at this point in her career, you would just kind of expect her to be perhaps a bit more low key, maybe a little bit more serious, maybe have this be more, like just something that attacks these issues in a way that feels a little bit more appropriate for somebody who's a little bit on the older side, even though, God, she really doesn't sound or look it. Just good God. Fuck. Damn. You're doing good, Miss Scott. But this album as a whole, like even after those baby making jams, the 1-2 punch of Ase and Sincerely Do is phenomenal. Phenomenal way to end this record. And I left it feeling so enriched. This is a kind of album that we don't necessarily see anymore. And if we do see something like it, it does not have the pedigree and modern sensibilities that this has. Like, I could breathlessly recommend this to basically anybody who enjoys hip hop in any way, shape, or form, and it doesn't project having that appeal. Like, if you are into, again, D'Angelo and all of that stuff, of course, Black Messiah, if you were into that kind of album, this is going to do something for you too. But again, this is way more of the Erykah Badu, Soulquarian kind of neo soul, but like mixing it with a more modern flair that you would see on, again, like a Kali Uchis record, for instance. And it just puts its best foot forward in every single regard. I don't think that this album is disappointing or underwhelming in basically any way an album like it could be disappointing or underwhelming. The pen's great, the performances are great. You feel the energy, you're moving with it. This is absolutely a year highlight record for me.
Please go listen to whom this may concern.
Yes, please, please, please do. It's that we're on the verge of a lot of hot new releases that are going to be coming out this summer. So make sure you chip away at that little backlog that you've been building up because no doubt everybody I know is just like, oh, I haven't gotten to this yet. I haven't gotten to that yet. It's still fucking April. Slow down.
We didn't even have time to talk about the Slater record, which we thought we were gonna do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we might do that next week just because I've never heard a Slater song before. I just know that people really fucking like her, so I'm like, okay, maybe we should pay this some attention so that I'm not completely out of the loop. But
But absolutely do not miss Jill
yeah.
Scott. Like, this is probably right now, it's probably my runner-up behind By Storm. But By
Hmm.
Storm always has that little asterisk of like, you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah.
But
This is
this
a
is like,
good time.
no, unequivocal recommendation. Like, this is must hear music from this year.
100%. Complete cosign. And hell, go back and listen to Jill Scott's earlier stuff too. She deserves a little bit more love from the online music press in general. So
Absolutely.
go and check out both of these new albums that are both very interesting, very good, a lot of good material for us today. But tell us what you're listening to in the comments below. Maybe we'll talk about it here on this here show next time you see us. Go check out the most recent episode of Jen and Jake's Bizarre Fray, where we lose our absolute fucking minds for 2 hours.
Talking about BioShock Infinite.
Talking about fucking BioShock Infinite. I'm very proud of that episode. I have some edits in there that I was quite the fan of. So go and check that out too.
If you'd like to support the show, you can join our YouTube membership. You'll get access to our Discord server and a couple of exclusive videos. We are also on Blue Sky now if you want to keep up with the direct feed and get some pot shot thoughts from me occasionally. You can follow us over on Jams and Tea, got Jams and Tea with an N and not an ampersand, .bsky.social. And as always,
Rock over London. Rock on Chicago. The New York Times. All the news that's fit to print.